So upon rewatching every single episode of BFDI for the ranking video I made, there are very clear character changes throughout the whole series because obviously that's inevitable. It's been going on for 15 years and also just different writing crews, different staff, all that. However, one of the main things I've noticed and that no one really is talking about is the derailment of Gelatin's character. Gelatin's character, when he first gets introduced into BFDIA, feels very unique and a fresh character we hadn't really seen before. Definitely one of the newbies in the BFDIA cast that stuck out to me a lot pre-revival. Characters like him and Fries were characters we hadn't really seen before, these somewhat anti-hero type of characters, not just pure villain or pure hero or just like a pure comedy type of character. It felt like a good mixture of both. But Gelatin was also a very savvy character. You could tell in the challenges and just his mannerisms and other stuff like that. He just felt like he was a very smart character, to be honest. When he had all the answers to like the bug poison stuff, it felt like he was a genuinely smart character. He reminded me a decent bit of Coiny, just a lot smarter and I guess less naive of a character. Coiny is more a comedy relief, but does have some savviness and, some strategic side to him, but he's more of a charismatic type of character. However, when Gelatin, it seems like a very more intellectual Coiny. And I felt like Gelatin's character could bounce off other characters in the show very well, especially characters like Golf Ball, some of the more unique characters in the show. He also kind of had a sassy characteristic to him too, which I really liked, and I felt like made him definitely funny. Different in Coiny's way of being funny, is his own unique way, kind of like Lollipop before Lollipop came in. Obviously not to the sassiness extent of Lollipop, but Gelatin definitely had that. Kind of felt like Noah from Total Drama in a way. I wouldn't say Gelatin was necessarily a main character of BFDIA, but definitely a memorable one for me, and definitely being one of the more unique characters. And then going into BFB, he still kept a lot of these characteristics. I think Gelatin might have been a bit more mean in BFB, but was still funny, sort of kept the same sort of attitude. But again, it was kind of hard to develop Gelatin just because there were so many other characters in BFB. There were like 60 or something, so I can understand why the writers might have had a hard time with Gelatin. However, post-split, Gelatin's character kind of just takes a complete 360 and becomes very, very childish, and they just completely dumb down his character. And you could make the argument that Gelatin wasn't going to last as long as he kept his original personality, because with this new personality, it did ultimately take him to being in the final two, but I feel like that just made his character way less unique. And I feel like that sort of old characteristics of himself would have made it so much more interesting with the newbie alliance with Lollipop and Teardrop. I feel like they all could have bounced off each other a lot better. And this honestly might be my biggest issue with the whole post-split. I mean, yeah, I know there were dumb plot lines and Leafy and Fiery just became very unlikable, but at least these damages at least got irreversed in BFDIA. Fiery became a lot better in the revival, and Leafy's whole character thing wasn't super out of character. Like, her whole actions and all that going into BFB weren't out of character for Leafy, but Gelatin was completely out of character to just make him a complete idiot, because this is just not who he was before that. And they just made Gelatin's character extremely childish and just lose a lot of its uniqueness. And then Gelatin basically does nothing in the challenges and doesn't win anything. They just make him a very weak competitor, which just wasn't Gelatin off the rip. Gelatin was clearly a pretty big competitor in BFDIA and BFB pre-split, making him probably the worst character in his alliance and one of the worst characters in the post-split. At least with some of the other good characters that got eliminated in the post-split, like Bubble, Ruby, and other characters like that, they didn't really get enough screen time for the characters to get remolded like Gelatin's did. But at least with some characters like Fiery and Ruby, they got better in the revival, when Gelatin's character basically stays the same in the revival. He stays like this dumbed down idiot, which just wasn't who he was, which makes it a lot weirder watching BFDIA front to back, because Gelatin's character just randomly takes a switch. And obviously there's this big writing gap because there was this huge difference, and I understand that. But again, they were able to write other characters like Pencil, who became this huge villain in BFB, but then in BFDIA, Pencil relatively stays the same in the beginning of BFDIA. And also other characters like Bubble. When Bubble becomes super sensitive in BFB, then Bubble doesn't really become like that. And again, less stints she's in the show, but she's still in the show to a stint. And Gelatin kind of just feels like a knockoff Fiery. I mean, I understand they're this duo and they stick together, but it ultimately leads to both of them getting an early elimination. Fiery's more up for debate just because Fiery did literally one BFDI, and maybe it could be the same thing for Gelatin because Gelatin did get second place in BFB, but again, I wasn't even really mad when Gelatin got eliminated because Gelatin was still his dumbed down worst character of himself. He became a very nice character and charismatic, and he just became like someone who he just completely wasn't. And maybe it would be better if there was any development going towards that, but there really wasn't at all. It was just kind of the split happens, and then this just happens with Gelatin's character. It's also kind of weird to me how Gelatin just randomly has this friendship with Fiery in BFDIA Revival that is never shown in BFB, at least to a major extent, even though it is a huge storyline in the BFDIA Revival. Gelatin's character, honestly, to me, is just all over the place with the 3 different voice actors, which again, I'm not blaming the show for at all. I'm just kind of expressing that throughout watching the show. And then the writing of Gelatin's character just taking a complete nosedive out of nowhere. And it is just very hard not to notice for me for the series because Gelatin was actually somewhat of a good character. Not somewhat, he actually was a very good character in BFDIA and BFB pre-split. And then, I don't know what they were thinking, they just made him into one of these Fieries, to a Coiny, just another one of these basic, bland, dumb characters. But at least Fiery and Coiny are unique to their time and actually have development, which makes them good characters, when Gelatin gets no development, even despite the fact he made it to the final 2 in BFB. There's not one single storyline where I can look at Gelatin and be like, oh yeah, that was something significant that happened to his character. I can't think of one thing that happens to Gelatin's character, despite him making a huge change. Maybe Gelatin can do something interesting or anything of note in the teapot return, but I kind of doubt it. But also, if you want me to make any sort of video topic, you can join my membership and leave it in my community posts when I make them, and you can also get early access to my content. It's another way of helping my account and helping me support making these videos because it does take a lot of time out of my day. Anyways, I hope you guys like this video and subscribe.